Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Pastor's Heart. Today I'd like to talk with you about something that actually came out of the sermon series that I'm doing right now. For those who have been following, I am right now preaching through the books of Samuel Kings, and we're almost done with the book of 1 Samuel. And one of the things that we see in 1 Samuel, of course, is that God took the kingdom away from Saul because of Saul's behavior, because he would not obey the Lord. And Saul decided that he was more important than the God that he was supposed to serve. And somehow he got this idea, or he forgot that if you are a king in Israel, that you are actually a secondary king. The actual king in Israel, of course, was Yahweh. And so the kingdom was taken away from him, and it was given to a little shepherd boy by the name of David. And David had proved over and over again that he was actually the more righteous man, that he was the better man, that he was the better general. He actually did kingly things. And so what Saul did, Saul had an opportunity. The kingdom was taken away from him. His son Jonathan was much more righteous than he was, and Jonathan had no problem giving up the kingdom to David and serving under David. And so Saul could have continued through his reign, and it just when he died, it would have passed on to Jonathan, who would have, I believe, given it over to David. But of course, Saul's not going to do that. Saul instead decided that he was going to try to kill the opposition. And so we see time after time of Saul attempting to find David and kill him. And yet, every time that Saul did this, he was kind of like, I don't know, like the ancient Wile E. Coyote, and David was the road runner, and he kept, no matter what he bought from Acme, David still got away. And so we see these instances where not only does David evade Saul, and to the point to where Saul can't kill him, but we also see that David has many opportunities to kill Saul. But David makes a statement to his followers that is, it's an important statement, but it's one that I believe gets taken out of context all the time. And that is I will not touch the Lord's anointed. And David understood that Saul had been anointed by God to be king. Now, was Saul ever qualified to be king? Of course, we know the answer to that was no. The people wanted somebody who looked the part rather than somebody who actually was a godly man and who would do what he was supposed to do. But yet God still had Samuel anoint Saul as king. And so David, even though he had opportunities to take Saul out, his answer was always the same. I'm going to let God take care of this. And so we see different accounts when he's in the wilderness of Ziph and that at one time Saul went into a cave to do his morning ablutions, and David could have killed him, and instead he just cut off a piece of his robe so that Saul would know that he was there. Another time we see that David actually snuck into Saul's camp and stole his spear and his water bottle and then confronted Saul. But in both of these cases, David confronted Saul, and he made Saul admit that he was living in sin, that he was wrong, and that David was righteous. And so the thing is that I see so many leaders today, so many Christian leaders, or so many of those in the church, so many church leaders, let me say that, who will use the phrase not to touch the Lord's anointed. So every time somebody they say something, if I call out a false teacher, for example, if I call out a wolf and I've been told, don't touch the Lord's anointed, it's almost like that's a get out of jail free card for charlatans today. And I can't tell you how many times you hear that phrase, that somebody is touching the Lord's anointed, just weeks before the evidence comes out and somebody ends up, that people see that they have been guilty of heinous crimes or something. And so what I want to talk about here is this, okay? Pointing out sin, pointing out false teaching, calling attention to heresy is not touching the Lord's anointed. Touching the Lord's anointed is maybe making, putting a coup in place that, or wanting to harm somebody rather than letting God take care of that. But it is absolutely crucial that as the people of God, that we point out the sin even in the leadership. That is not touching the Lord's anointed. That's actually holding them accountable. Because one of the things that we'll see throughout the entire history of the people of Israel is that, especially in the northern kingdom, the people never once called out the king for the sin. And so God raised up prophets to speak to the people so that they would be able to know what was right and what was wrong. The only prophets that I know that actually spoke to the king and said, stop it, would be Elijah and Elisha. That they went up against the leadership and said, what you're doing is sinful. And so were they touching the Lord's anointed? No, they were not. They were not out there to kill the king. They were out there to bring truth. And so I would encourage you, especially as we await the time of the Lord to come back. The Bible tells us that false teachers are going to rise up. False messiahs are going to rise up. And you can bet that these false teachers are going to use the excuse or lay out this phrase that when somebody tries to come up and to question them for their behavior, for their teaching, for their theology, whatever it is that they're throwing out there, they're going to say, do not touch the Lord's anointed. But yet we want to follow David's example, where David actually called Saul out. And he told Saul, and he made Saul admit that what he was doing was wrong. Because ultimately, that's the only hope that people have. If we are afraid to call out church leadership, we will continue to have the downward spiral that I believe that we're seeing in the church today. So again, I would encourage you that if you have a pastor, if you have leadership, if you have elders who are standing up against sin in our world today, who are willing to call out the reality of the murder of millions of unborn children and call that out as sin, to call out the agenda of the world around us to destroy the family. If you have pastors who are willing to stand up for that, encourage them. Let them know how much you appreciate them. If you have pastors who are afraid, come alongside them so that they can have the courage that they need to stand up and call a spade a spade. And don't ever be afraid of calling out sin, even amongst the leadership. Because ultimately, when we're calling out sin and we're going out there to destroy the wolf that the enemy wants to bring in there, they actually aren't God's anointed, and therefore we're not touching them. And so I know this is not one of those exciting messages that I might want to give, but I do think it's an important one. And so I pray that as you are gathering with your siblings in Christ this week, that you have an amazing time in God's presence. And I look forward to seeing you again in a future video. God bless you all.